Hello and welcome to Blood Red's Morning Bulletin. I'm joined by my fellow Liverpool.com writer, Emmet Gates, and today we're going to be discussing something we didn't really want to discuss, but unfortunately, against Fabinho was injured, and he is a doubt for the Chelsea game, and for the Southampton game, and potentially for the Champions League final as well. So, how much of a blow is he?
Massive, absolutely massive. I wrote about this before for the website that there's a lot of players in the Liverpool side that you can kind of replace, and obviously they're not those players when they're not there, it's not the same. But I think there's no player that's missed more than Fabinho when he's not playing, because that number 6 position, like lying deep in the base of midfield, nobody can interpret that role like he does within the Liverpool squad. He knows when to press, when to break up the opposition's rhythm. You can make a case that Thiago could do it, but Thiago has different characteristics to Fabinho, and he obviously doesn't have A, the physicality, or B, the stamina to break up the opposition's rhythm, or press, relentlessly in the way Fabinho does, or know when to press and when to back off. So Fabinho is going to be a massive, massive miss. And Liverpool's midfield isn't the same when he's not in it. And we've seen that earlier in the season when he was out for a few games. Jordan Henderson kind of came into the role and he did okay, but Henderson again doesn't have the attributes that Fabinho has. So in a sense, it's Fabinho being unavailable for the next 2 or 3 weeks is probably, you couldn't imagine a worse player to be out for Liverpool, because he offers so much protection to the back four. It's horrific news for Liverpool in what is coming up for two finals, and you're just like, of all the players, why did it have to be Fabinho?
Yeah, I think Klopp said something similar about how that's the one area where Liverpool don't really have any depth. But Jordan Henderson came in against him versus Aston Villa, and I think he did a fairly commendable job. He was decent enough,
Well, the thing was, actually, Fabinho was awful against Aston Villa before he got that injury, and actually Jordan Henderson came on and made Liverpool a bit more uh, cohesive and give a bit of a structure in midfield. But that's not necessarily to say that he will manage to do the same against Chelsea, tomorrow, and against Southampton, and maybe the Champions League final. So it's
it's a completely different test, isn't it, against Chelsea?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, higher quality opposition, and especially with Chelsea's midfield, and we're hearing that Kante is going to be fit, Kovacic too. So it's going to be a big test for Liverpool's midfield three. And you just think, of all the players, why did it have to be Fabinho type thing?
With both Kovacic and Kante potentially being fit and potentially being in the starting 11, is it fair to say that the game will be won in the midfield tomorrow?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that would have maybe been the case anyway had Fabinho been available, but because he's not, I think it's going to be an even more important area. So I think Jurgen Klopp needs to get his selection right in midfield for the final. And we're maybe talking what Henderson, Thiago, Naby Keita, probably in all likelihood. So I think that area is definitely where the final will be won and lost, because Liverpool is going to be full strength either side in defence and an attack. It's just the midfield where you're thinking, Liverpool's not going into the final with Klopp's first choice in mind. So yeah, I think that area is going to be crucial tomorrow.
Yeah, and then looking ahead to the rest of the season, obviously there's still 2 games left in the Premier League. Do you see Jordan Henderson playing both of those in the holding midfield role? Because at the moment it looks unlikely that Fabinho will be back in time for those Premier League fixtures. At least there's still hope for the Champions League final. Or do you see maybe Klopp potentially bringing in someone else as well to trial in the position?
it's probably not the time to start experimenting and putting in, players in different positions, at this stage of the season. But I think, yeah, it's going to be Henderson from here on out. I mean, I said at the beginning of the bulletin, maybe Thiago, Thiago could maybe play the role maybe as more a regista, old fashioned playmaker, orchestrating play from deep, but he doesn't have the characteristics to press the opposition high up the pitch, which is what Fabinho did so well. Naby Keita, you think, isn't really suited to that role either. He's more better either side of the player in the middle. Curtis Jones, I don't really think so. So I mean, I think it's Jordan Henderson by default. And I think you look at it and you think that's probably where Liverpool will invest in the summer, is to get a replacement for Fabinho. And obviously we've seen Aurelien Tchouameni, difficult to say his name. We've seen the links with him, and that kind of makes sense because he's a bit versatile and he can play in different roles. So I think, yeah, Liverpool do need a vice Fabinho for exactly situations like this. So I think it's going to be Jordan Henderson by default.
Yeah, my only concern is there is 3 games in the next week for Liverpool, and Jordan Henderson himself doesn't have the greatest injury record. So in that regard, that's why I think we could see some experimentation. I mean, James Milner has previously played in the holding midfield role. He can play just about anywhere. And I know there's been some rogue ideas thrown about Joel Matip potentially. He played as a holding midfielder. It's the same with Ibrahima Konate as well, that he used to play as a holding midfielder before transitioning to the centre-back position. So do you think we could see maybe any of those? I mean, because there are just so many games, you can't expect Henderson to play all of them. And then, of course, there's also Tyler Morton, who covered for Fabinho at some point earlier on in the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not fair on Jordan Henderson, and we saw that with him earlier in the season, where Liverpool were decimated in midfield with injuries, and he pretty much played every game, and he produced some leggy performances because he wasn't able to rest, and Klopp had to use him. So you kind of don't want that to happen to Henderson at this point of the season with things on the line. I think we might get to a point where if Liverpool are not going to win the title, maybe on the last day of the season, we might see Klopp just doing a drastic overhaul and just experimenting and putting players in midfield just to kind of save legs for the Champions League final against Madrid. But I think he would only do that once it's maybe mathematically certain that Liverpool can't win the title, and the game's pretty much a dead rubber. So we might see that to kind of save legs for, Paris. But yeah, I don't think it is fair to use Henderson in every single game. But again, he pretty much has the position now by default, unless we could see maybe Joe Matip or Konate in defensive in that Fabinho role. I mean, I'd say why not give it a go? If you're in a situation where the last game of the season is a dead rubber and there's nothing, why not? I mean, conserve energy for Paris and just use maybe Matip as in the Fabinho role. Why not? There's nothing really to lose, and if it turns out well, then it's a plus, and if it doesn't, then you don't really lose anything. But yeah, I do think it is an area where Liverpool, I think, will have to think about in the summer about getting someone in for situations like this, because you can't. Henderson's 31, coming 32. You can't be relying on him to play every single game, especially in that position, which is a demanding role.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the most important thing for Liverpool potentially this summer, is to buy a holding midfielder, and Aurelien Tchouameni would be a good option.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's a hard one too. It's kind of like trying to get a backup for Trent Alexander-Arnold, because Fabinho doesn't miss that many games. So it's whoever you bring in, you're trying to sell, playing for Liverpool, but then the other person is thinking, well, I'm not going to get too many games because Fabinho is going to be first choice. But then when it's in situations like this, when he isn't available, then you do need someone. So I think it's going to be tricky. But yeah, too many. We've seen the links, and the links are growing over the last couple of weeks. So you imagine maybe he could be the one to come in. Um,
he's also someone who can play in a number 8 role as well, a bit
yeah,
more advanced. So he wouldn't just have to rely on Fabinho
yeah,
being injured or suspended. He could be part of that Liverpool midfield alongside Fabinho. So I think
yeah.
that's why that kind of link makes sense from Liverpool's perspective and from so many's perspective as well. But thanks, Emmett, for joining me. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Make sure to check out the rest of the Blood Red content going out today and all the written content on Liverpool.com.